Fuck these motherfuckers. It's time to go. All I want to do is fucking eat.
We're not practicing to beat somebody. We're practicing to beat everybody.
Nowhere to run and nowhere to hide for 4 quarters. They got to see us in our house for 4 quarters. They got to look us in the eye for 4. This is about us and our family and our house. This is about us. This is our mentality. We ain't backing down. We ain't running. Set a tone, send a message. This is our house. Physical toughness wins in football now. And if you in this room, you got it. If you come in here, you better believe in it. Because this physical toughness is what makes the difference. Elite focus. That's all I do to the guy across from me. I'm fixing to whip his ass. Not in my box. Not today. It's about us. It's about our family. We attack. You take that helmet and you strike them. And you strike them and you strike them. That's how you get respect.
Now I am going to pick shit out of them. Physically, I want to break them.
Hello and welcome back in to yet another edition of How About That Dogscast. You would think that winning 2 out of the last 3 national championships, 46 out of your last 48 games, might be enough to put you at the forefront of the college football conversation across the country. That's not exactly the case for the Georgia Bulldogs as we sit here headed into February of 2024. But this is not a place that Georgia hasn't been before. So tonight what we're going to do is examine exactly who is getting all the buzz and why. And again, this is not the first time Georgia's been down this road, so we're going to look back at how we have navigated this situation in the past. Now, I should be upfront and tell you here that this is not a talk about Georgia somehow not being considered a good football team. They are. I mean, you ask virtually anyone that has a vote or has an opinion about college football in the year 2024, and they're going to tell you that headed into the season, Georgia will probably be their number 1 pick. I mean, all the big names have said as much. Reese Davis, Pete Thamel, the guys over at CBS. They all have gone down the list and said, yeah, if I had to pick a team today, it's probably going to be the Georgia Bulldogs. They're probably best positioned to open the season as the number 1 team in the land. So it's not like people don't know Georgia's good. It's not like people don't recognize that they should be good this year. It's not like they don't know that Georgia is the odds-on betting favorite to win the national championship in 2024. Now, of course, that doesn't mean anything. Georgia was the odds-on betting favorite to win the national championship in 2023. Then you have to go play football games. And it's like I've told you from this chair over and over and over. The games are not played with joysticks on your Xbox. Injuries happen. The football is shaped funny and it takes funny bounces. There are things that you cannot control. And we are in the time of the year now where Georgia, along with every other team across the country, is trying to handle the things that they can handle, control their controllables. This is the period of the year where you get into off-season workouts. So everybody's out there before the crack of dawn, when it's cold in most of the country, and they're doing things to pay the price now to be successful come the fall. Georgia's no different. Now, if you pay attention to the program, if you know what they're doing, if you have followed them over the last few years and know why they have succeeded the way they have succeeded, it's because of how they work right now in this period of the season. Remember, for these student athletes, there is no off season. College football is their job. The coaches, the same, obviously. You and I might get to take a deep breath, exhale just a little bit before we get into spring practice and all that kind of stuff, but not the team, not the players, not the coaches. No one in that building, if we're being completely honest, is taking a break right now. They're focused on off-season workouts. They're focused on recruiting. They're focused on learning to become better coaches. have better schemes for when the season gets here. So they're working hard. But that leaves people like me and other people who talk about college football a lot and people who have made it their livelihood to follow the sport. It leaves us out here talking about, well, everything on the periphery of the program because there are no games between the lines right now. And the names, again, nobody's doubting exactly what Georgia can be this year, but they still have to go prove it. And there are a few high-profile names out there that seem to be on everyone's lips right now. Just like in the last couple of years, there's been news in the offseason that has changed the way the offseason has played out in terms of who gets the media coverage and why. Think back to July 2021. Now, this may catch you as a surprise because if for some reason in my brain, I always flip-flop these two events and how they shook out and when they happened. But in July of 2021, we got the news, though it had been long hinted at and rumored, but we got the official news that Oklahoma and Texas were going to join the SEC. Now, this tells you a couple of things. A move like that with two blue blood programs coming into the best conference in the country is going to shake the world of college football and demand our attention. Up until that point in 2021, Georgia thought we were going to have a pretty good team. Everything was rolling along. JT Daniels was there. He was the starter. We knew the defense was going to be pretty good. And then this bombshell happens in the middle of the summer. That tells us also that the movement of conference realignment was already well underway. And that's going to be a common theme throughout this history lesson here. So July 2021, Oklahoma and Texas come into the league. Now, of course, we all know what happened later that year. The Dogs go on to win the national championship, the first one in 41 years. Keely Ringo, Stetson Bennett, Jordan Davis, those guys went out there and did what had not been done for Georgia in decades. For a lot of Georgia Bulldogs, we could just stop this story right here. Don't have to talk about anything else. How many people do you know that you heard say, I can die a happy person now that this has happened? I saw the Dogs win it, a championship for my lifetime. Little did we know what was about to unfold. So the Dogs roll into the offseason. Everything's going good. Georgia and everyone associated with Dog Nation and around the program were all riding very high. Like you really can't get any higher. At least we thought. And then we get the news again in the summer months, this time right before the season began, We went through all of spring as the national champions. We're all high as a kite. We get through the summer. Football season can't get here fast enough. Georgia's bringing back a good team. We're all very excited. But all of that offseason also had the buzz and the hum of the SEC expansion, and we all knew it was coming. So even though Georgia was national champions, they were one of the least talked about national champions in recent memory. Now, Kirby and the football team loved this. They didn't mind that one bit because it allowed him to motivate his team, keep them having that edge that was going to help them succeed later that year. But right before the season, more big news broke. Again, long rumored, often hinted at, more often wished for. The news came down that college football and the college football playoff were going to move to a 12-team format from a 4-team format. And immediately everyone starts talking about, man, I wish it was this year. What's it going to look like? How is it going to play out? We still have to get over this last year here, last couple of years before we actually get to the playoff. It's going to happen in 26, they said. It wasn't long after that they moved it up to 24. And then things really picked up. That's all anybody wanted to talk about was the playoff and what it would mean and how it was going to change the landscape of college football. Meanwhile, Georgia, Stetson Bennett just kept rolling out there, just kept winning games, just kept on doing what it was they were doing. They get down to December. The Dogs are 12-0 for the second straight year. They go out, they win the SEC championship against LSU. Again, Dog Nation riding high. But even with all of these accomplishments, they seem to be sharing the spotlight. And that spotlight was about to get even dimmer. Because it was later in December that Deion Sanders was hired as the new head coach at the University of Colorado. Now, I've had some things to say in the past about Deion, what kind of coach I thought he would be at Colorado, how many games I thought they would win. That's not what this video is about. But there is no denying that from the point Deion Sanders took the job at Colorado, almost all of the media, at least national media, across the country were stumbling over themselves to talk about what would Deion do? What would the Buffaloes be? How was he going to handle this team? Would he fall on his face? Would he be successful? Everybody seemed to have a take. You could not get away from the Deion Sanders conversation. But meanwhile, in the midst of all that, and just as it was ramping up, our Dogs went back out there, won a second consecutive national championship, and did it in historic fashion. The largest bowl game victory in the history of college football, any bowl game. They bludgeoned TCU on their way to a 15-0 record, back-to-back national championships. And if you were outside of Dog Nation, if you were outside of the Georgia Bulldog fan base and outside of the building, the feeling was starting to bubble up that the general casual fan, they were already tired of Georgia on one hand or brand new bandwagon fans on the other. It was one or the other. There really were no in-between seats on that bus. Either you couldn't wait for Georgia to lose or you loved the new brand, the red and black, the Power G, and you wanted to just be, associated with excellence, and that's what you were doing. You were cheering for the Dogs. And we all know what happened on the heels of that second national championship. There was the tragedy where two beloved members of the Bulldog Nation family were gone too soon. There were the off-the-field incidents tangentially related to that. Just in the fact that they were in the same ballpark of of incident. And what had seemed to be a calm weather around the Dogs, where we were just happily celebrating and enjoying those national championships, seemed to turn into a little bit more of a pall, right? A little bit of a gloomy feeling was over the program. And here Georgia was, Kirby Smart, back-to-back national champions, literally whipping everyone that had ever won the college football playoff on their way to becoming back-to-back national champions. And it just felt like they didn't get to celebrate it the way they wanted to. Now, as the season rolled forward, Georgia got on people's lips more and more often. Everybody knew that Georgia was going to be good, but they knew Georgia had a lot of change. There was going to be a lot of change. And the national media started to say, yeah, look, there's an opening here. Can Georgia be beat? Who will be the person to do it? The team. That was the reason you were watching Georgia in 2023 if you were not a Georgia Bulldog fan. It was going to be who gets them, because everybody was going to give them their best shot. And at times, as a fan, it felt like, well, man, I've enjoyed this. This has been great. But it just feels like people are just, nipping at our heels. They're shooting for us. Well, of course they were. Georgia was the back-to-back and reigning national champions. I'm sure that our friends that are Alabama fans, this is a feeling that they've known for a long time. Georgia had just ascended to that position. And now the team, the coaches, and yes, the fans of the Georgia Bulldogs were having to learn how to deal with that. It was an interesting time, to be certain. But all the while, the one thing that I mentioned at the beginning that never went away was the fact that college football was undergoing a realignment. Conferences were exploding, fracturing, sending teams across the country. No longer was college football relegated to being just a regional sport. So even when people were talking about the Dogs, it wasn't that long until they had spun off, pivoted, and had took off down the rabbit hole of college football realignment. That was all the news was in the summer leading up to 2023. I wanted to talk about the Georgia Bulldogs, but everybody else wanted to talk about college football realignment and television deals and super conferences and a bunch of noise about who is going to leave, even though they hadn't left yet. The future of the sport. That's what was on everyone's mind. And then somewhere after that was, can Georgia three-peat, or who will be the team to beat them? That was probably number 2 on most people's minds. But the conversation around college football realignment was exploding. There's no other way to put it. Then we head into the 2023 season. Coach Smart and his coaching staff, in retrospect, did one of their best coaching jobs when you look at the things that they had to deal with over the course of the season. The one thing that you can't get away from here is the fact that this team that were the back-to-back and reigning national champions were never completely healthy in 2023. The first 4 to 6 weeks of the season, the injuries were predominantly in the running back room. And of course, they were settling in new players at new positions and everyone was getting to know each other, but they kept winning. We get to the middle part of the season there and people start to look ahead to the end and say, well, this is the inflection point. What will Georgia do? Now they're starting to get a couple of those running backs back, maybe feeling a little bit better about themselves, but now we've lost our starting offensive lineman. It was in this middle window here where everyone's All-American Brock Bowers was injured. The dynamic wide receiver Ladd McConkey was injured in this window. Oh, I forgot. Ladd missed the first few games of the season too with a back injury. Never over the course of this season did the Dogs have their full complement of weapons at hand to truly show what they could be. But they kept winning. Again, this is about Kirby Smart and his coaching staff. This is about the job that they were able to do during that stretch. And then we finally got to that money-making stretch on the back end of the season where everybody thought for certain the Dogs were going to go down. And it is a credit to the players, in addition to the coaching staff, that came back from injury, that got back in the saddle, and completed Georgia's third consecutive 12-0 regular season. Something that had never been done in the history of modern college football. You could go all the way back to 1936, when the AP poll first started. No one had ever done it. Georgia also went 8-0 in conference play in the regular season for the third consecutive year, obviously. Another historical mark, something that had never been done. And as we sit here right now, we know that eventually the law of averages caught up to the Dogs. They didn't have their best day in Atlanta. They didn't win the SEC. Therefore, a group of people in a room decided that the team that had been dominant all year was now not worthy of an opportunity to defend the title that they had owned for 2 seasons. As we move beyond that, Georgia finished out the very best they could. They went out and made a statement in their bowl game, breaking the record that they had set the year before for the largest bowl game victory in the history of the sport of college football. Now, listen, friends, I don't care exactly how you feel about the 12-team playoff, but if it were in place last year, do you think anybody wants to see those Georgia Bulldogs in that 12-team playoff? Let's take it a step further. Think back to the years where Georgia was left out, where Georgia was the number 5 seed in recent years and didn't quite make it into the Final Four. In any of those seasons, do you think anybody in that field in those seasons would have wanted to play Georgia in the playoff? The answer is no. Just like the answer would have been no this last year. Again, this is a Georgia football team that is currently riding a 39-game winning streak in the regular season. A 27-game winning streak in the regular season inside SEC play. They have 3 consecutive 13-win seasons. They've won 2 out of the last 3 national championships. And even with all of that, they still are not the team that people want to talk about here in the aphelion of college football's offseason. Like I said, though, the Dogs have been here before. It's okay. We don't have to be talked about. I know it makes us feel good as fans to have our team talked about. Anytime, all the time, every time. But we also know how this story goes. We can be confident that Kirby Smart and his coaching staff are out there working. That those players that are now representing the Power G and the University of Georgia, that they are out there working. They are doing everything that they need to do to get ready for the season that lies ahead. I have no doubt that this team will be ready when spring practice rolls around. And we are going to know so much more about them on the other side, just like everyone else will. But if they're not talking about Georgia, then who are they talking about? Ohio State has a very talented roster. They've made a portal splash in the offseason like they haven't done in the past. They had another great recruiting class. They have to be the Big Ten favorite heading into the season. So we know Ohio State is a team that seems to be one trendy pick heading into 2024 to not only get into that 12-team playoff, but win the national championship. I mean, if it's not this year, when's it going to happen? Oregon is another very talented roster that if they don't win the Big Ten outright, seeing as how they're a brand new member in the league this year, people seem to think that they're going to be right there. They've been on the precipice. They're just right there. Maybe this is the year they break through. And with the 12-team playoff, you have to think that they have a very good shot of doing well enough, even in a new league, to get into that tournament. They had the overall number 6 recruiting class in traditional recruiting. And they had key portal additions from dynamic players. So Dan Lanning and the Oregon Ducks are another team that we have to look at and that people want to talk about heading into this season. Now let's look at Alabama. We mentioned them quickly earlier. Kalen DeBoer is set up for success at Alabama, even with Nick stepping away. This is a very talented roster. Yes, they lost a few key pieces, but make no mistake, the team that Alabama is going to put on the field in 24 is going to be one of the most talented teams in all of college football. The expectations at Tuscaloosa have not changed. Now, a lot of people are torn over whether that's a good thing or not. There's a certain part of the Alabama fan base that demands not only an appearance in this new 12-team playoff. I mean, that's like a given to most of them. But if they don't win the national title, this season is a failure. That's one group. And then you have another group that says, yeah, I expect us to compete for the conference title and make the 12-team playoff and take our shot there. But really, any way you cut it, the expectations are the same in Tuscaloosa. And it's going to be interesting to see what Kalen DeBoer can do to rise to those expectations. Texas, Steve Sarkisian. That's another school that's on everyone's lips here in the offseason. They made the college football playoff in 2023. He has his starting quarterback, Quinn Ewers, returning. A top 3 recruiting class in the traditional manner from high school. He had key portal additions to replace some of the losses they had. Moving into this new season, he had to make sure Ewers had some weapons. And then, just like the other schools, there's a little intrigue here because they're coming into a new league. So Texas is definitely a team that is a darling of the talking head world here in the depths of winter before we get into the season. Ole Miss is another team that everybody seems to want to talk about. Lane Kiffin took the Rebels and went 10-2 in 2023, coming off a Peach Bowl championship. Their starting quarterback returns, Jackson Dart. They've been very active in the transfer portal. Most everyone has Ole Miss, at the very worst, a top 10 team heading into the season. Most seem to want to put them in the top 5 for 2024. They are absolutely a trendy pick to make that 12-team playoff. They are the team that everyone pointed to and said, well, in the past they had a roadblock, but the 12-team playoff opens it up for them, sort of like Oregon, to get into the conversation and make some noise. Now, as I mentioned, these teams, they're out here doing things both in the regular recruiting world, but also in the transfer portal world. I mean, you can look here. There are certain programs that want to build their teams and their programs through traditional high school recruiting and player development. Then there are other coaches and programs that have decided they, for whatever reason, aren't going to be able to compete through that method. And more than just plugging holes or adding players at positions of need, they will essentially turn their roster over every year via the transfer portal, at least 50-50. And Ole Miss is one of those schools. They're not the only one, though. If you take a look, they are a school that made a big splash this year in the transfer portal. 5-star Walter Nolan along the defensive line. They brought in offensive linemen from the University of Washington who played in the national championship game, who were part of the Joe Moore award-winning group that the Huskies put on the field last year. They did that because they understood, and Lane Kiffin admitted as much, after playing Georgia between the hedges in 23, he needed a certain kind of player, a certain body type that he was not able to recruit on his own to come and play for Mississippi. So he hit the transfer portal. And when you make moves like that, when you make moves and then you follow through, you hit home runs, you land those big fish, as it were, well, that makes a splash and people take notice. That's one of the reasons that Ole Miss is being talked about so heavily here in the offseason. But they're not alone. I mentioned Oregon. All they did was go out and get one of the most dynamic wide receivers in the country to come in and pair with Dylan Gabriel, a starting quarterback who has experience in big games, to come in and head their program, along with Dante Moore, who's another quarterback, just in case Dylan Gabriel doesn't work out. There are schools out here making moves. That's the bottom line. And they're doing that because they know that they have to. And it would honestly be negligent if the media didn't talk about these things, because this is what crafts and shapes the college football season before we ever get there. Yes, these players and schools, they still have to go through spring practice. They still have to do all the work. But it's these moves in this new world of college football that are going to dictate how things shake out for you, or at least have a lot to say about it. I mean, look at Ohio State. Again, Ohio State year after year recruits at a top level, consistently in the top 5. Occasionally, they'll jump up and get to number 1. We know they're talented, but this year's different. Their rival, we talked about this last week, just went out and won the national championship. They're not happy about that. They've lost 3 consecutive years to that rival. 3 consecutive years, they haven't been Big Ten champions, which some Ohio State fans think is their birthright. So they had to make some moves, and they did. They hit the portal. They went and got Caleb Downs, Julian Sayin. You can read the list here. Quinshawn Judkins, Will Howard. There are a lot of players that are new to Columbus this offseason. But that's not unusual in the new world of college football. Texas. Everybody knows that Texas is one of the best states in the country for high school recruiting. But there's a dirty little secret about Texas and what they can do as a program now that they're moving into the SEC that has to do directly with their high school recruiting. People don't often think about it, but the fact of the matter is that if they strictly recruit the state of Texas, then they will not be able to compete in the SEC. And they know that. So if you go look at their traditional recruiting rankings, you're going to see that they are doing what they haven't done as much of over the last decade, which is spread out nationally. They're trying to reestablish Texas as a national brand when it comes to recruiting. And then when they can't, or they haven't met those needs through traditional recruiting, they're no different than anybody else. They're going to go into the portal and make things happen. Just look. Isaiah Bond, wide receiver 1 from Alabama, now a Texas Longhorn. Amari Niblack, wonderful tight end, receiving, he's a good receiver for Alabama, now a Texas Longhorn. Trey Moore, edge player, wonderful addition for the Longhorns. The bottom line here is whether we're talking about Ryan Day and the Ohio State Buckeyes or Dan Lanning and the Oregon Ducks, whether it's Alabama and the new coach and the stepping down of Nick Saban, the greatest of all time. Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin and the Lane train, trying to do things that have never been done before at the University of Mississippi. Or Steve Sarkisian and the Texas Longhorns trying to reclaim the glory of their past years. There are plenty of very obvious reasons that people in the college football world are talking about a team other than the team that everyone believes should be number one heading into the college football season. It's an interesting thing, but it's also a glorious thing because it gives people like me stuff to talk about when we're not playing games. Now, if you don't think it through, this is the kind of thing that some people get flat out, they get upset about it. Like they feel absolutely disrespected. I understand. All I was trying to do in this exercise was roll it out there that there is a reason to it and that Georgia, well, they've been here before. And just like in years past, I think Kirby and his program and his players, they're just fine with that. They're just fine with the fact that people are out here talking about Ohio State and all the flashy portal moves they're making, or Texas, and the fact that Quinn Ewers is back, so maybe they should be, right there in the top 5 heading into the new season. Or is this the year that Lane Kiffin or Dan Lanning, they're going to break through, take their program to heights that they haven't seen in years or maybe ever? What's going to happen at Alabama? I mean, is Kalen DeBoer actually going to get the job done? How long will Alabama fans give him before they decide it's long enough? Will 9 wins be good enough in Tuscaloosa? Does he have to win 11? What's it going to look like? What kind of offense is it going to be? There's so many questions. So yeah, these are legitimate talking points. It's fine. But I just find it kind of funny that a program like the University of Georgia, having the amount of success that they have had over the last 3 years, still isn't the very first team that's talked about when you discuss the sport of college football in 2024. In most instances, they're the last team. And in a lot of ways, that's a sign of respect, because people assume that Georgia's going to be really good. People assume that they're going to have a good offense under Carson Beck. People assume that they're always going to play great defense at Georgia. People looked at the SEC after Nick Saban stepped down and said, what does it do? inside the conference? What does it mean? And what it means is every team, will they take a step forward? Because now the greatest coach of all time is not the coach that you're going to be facing when you have to play Alabama. The second part of that question is, well, what does it mean for Georgia? Well, what it means for Georgia is that they also take a step forward. That's just the reality. Georgia had done all it needed to do over the last 2-3 seasons to prove that they were already the standard in college football, the best program in college football. Yes, they lost the game to Nick Saban and Alabama in the SEC championship game. That's one result. Like I said, the Dogs have won 46 of 48. Saying that game in December at the SEC championship game somehow nullifies the previous 2 seasons and the position that Georgia had ascended to on a national stage as the preeminent program in the sport, saying that the SEC championship game wipes all that away, that's like being ignorant enough to say that the weather outside my window is indicative of whatever's happening with the climate as a whole. 2 entirely different things. Virtually no relationship between the 2. It's a snapshot in time. And it goes beyond just the last 2 or 3 years. You can look at Kirby's entire time in Athens, his second season. He took his team to the national championship game and lost on a miracle play. It's football. It happens. To sit back and say that there's some huge difference between that Georgia team and Nick Saban's team that year, that's foolhardy. It's silly. And every year since then, nothing has changed. And eventually, it's like Kirby said, you keep swinging. Eventually, you're going to hit one that leaves the yard. Well, he hit 2.
In overtime, we didn't finish when we had to, and Alabama did. And to give them credit, but I think everybody can see that Georgia's going to be a force to be reckoned with. I'm very proud of this team and this university, and we're not going anywhere.
He told the world after that miracle play when the Dogs lost to Alabama in the national championship game following the 2017 season. The University of Georgia, everyone can see what we're about, and the University of Georgia is not going anywhere. Now, I'm paraphrasing, but he let everybody know right there what the future was going to hold for the Dogs. And they have gone out and backed it up in spades. So when you look at what the 12-team playoff does for Georgia, when you look at what Nick Saban's retirement does for Georgia, yes, Georgia steps forward too. So now the question becomes, who inside the conference is going to come and get Georgia? We've talked about a few here tonight. They're going to give it their best shot. Alabama, Texas, Oklahoma, LSU, Missouri. They're challengers. But sometimes when you're winning, the way everybody else can win, the only way they can win, because everybody's coming for you when you're winning the way Georgia's won the last few years. And the only way that these other teams can win is by trying to knock you off your perch. You know the song. You know, a team goes 8-4, 9-2, 9-3. But they beat that big team. For years, it was Alabama. That team's Georgia now. So, yeah, there's a lot of moving, a lot of shifting, a lot of rearranging. But the question is, who's going to come get Georgia? And we could talk about this on a national scale too. Because as far as who has the top program in the country, it's fluid. It's fluid. But Georgia's right there in the top 3. You could make an argument for it. So that's how it shakes out. I'm not surprised at all that everybody's talking about these other programs, these other teams, deservedly so. But at the end of the day, they've got to go play the games just like the Dogs do. And it's going to be a very interesting 2024 as the teams make their way down through the schedules and we see what happens when players actually take the field. One of the things I want to point out to you here is that we are on our way to 10,000 subscribers here on YouTube. I'm blessed to be able to say that we can even see that number in the future. Please take the time. If you enjoyed the content today, go ahead and give us a follow. Subscribe to the channel. Give the video a thumbs up and let us know if we're doing a good job. Because that's what we use to create the kind of content, Georgia content, college football content that you want to see. So if you enjoy what we're doing here, please go ahead, give us a follow, click that bell so you don't miss it when we go live or post a new video. And share with your friends. Let them know that we're out here and let them know about what we're doing, because we're doing our very best 7 days a week, 365 days a year to bring you all of the Georgia content that you could ever want to see from a perspective that nobody else is going to be able to bring to you. I want to say thank you so much to all of you for being here with me, hanging in for another edition of How About That Dogs Cast, because the reason we do this is because, yes, we love the Georgia Bulldogs. I'm a University of Georgia alum. But when I looked around the ecosystem of Georgia football media, there was nobody out there doing the kind of show that I wanted to do, that I felt like Georgia Bulldog fans deserve. And I wanted to be here to provide that for Dog Nation and college football fans in general. So, again, I can't say it enough. Thank you all for being here with me for another show. That's going to wrap it up for me this week. Until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of your friends, take care of your family. And go Dogs!
So how about them fucking dogs? That's what I told them.